All right, good morning, everybody. I'd like to start us off today. It's my pleasure to introduce Mohammed Aaser. He is the Vice President of Marketing Strategy and Analytics at Ameriprise, where he leads a marketing strategy and analytics team within the marketing organization, designated to drive growth, deliver a leading client experience, and more deeply leverage advanced analytics. Moreover, Mohammed partners with analytics teams across the organization to deliver against these goals. He is currently focused on a number of initiatives, including client experiences, retention, and marketing effectiveness. Prior to Ameriprise, Mohammed worked for McKinsey & Company, where he launched their analytics division. Mohammed completed his undergraduate from Carlson School of Business and his MBA from Harvard University. And today, Mohammed will be sharing with us his insight on why more than 50% of analytics projects fail.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Let me take you back a couple of years. In 2014, we were in the midst of launching McKinsey's analytic division, and we got together some of the leading executives, or the biggest companies in the US, and their leading executives to talk about big data and analytics. We talked about a whole host of things that they were doing. They were investing in data lakes, in machine learning technologies, in cloud infrastructure. We got to a couple of other topics, but one thing that I remembered quite clearly is when we asked, what type of impact are you seeing from analytics? And of this group of 14 CXOs, less than half of them said that they had a meaningful impact from their analytics efforts. And it got me thinking, if they're investing tens of millions of dollars into their analytics programs, why aren't they seeing success? Now, the good news is that since then, that was 2014, many of these companies have shown some impact. But what I'd love to share today with you is what lessons they've learned so that we, as we're developing our own analytics capabilities, can accelerate our impact. So I just want to get a sense of the folks in the audience today. For those who are in data, just a show of hands, for those in data science or engineering roles, could you just raise your hand? Okay, it seems about half the audience. Okay, how about technology roles? Okay, maybe a quarter. How about in leadership roles, either leading analytic teams or business? Another basically quarter. How about not in analytics today? I'm kind of new. Okay, a very small number. So I think some of the messages today, I think will definitely resonate with those who are in sort of those data science roles, but even as leaders of analytics organizations, the messages today we can re-emphasize with our teams. As you know, there's just been a ton of press about data science, right? The sexiest job. You guys have all seen this stuff. The market research reports basically show that investments are growing at a double-digit rate. That's why we've got so many great partners who are sponsoring this event. They know that there's a big prize to be captured, lots of money being invested, over $150 billion. And Glassdoor just released its rankings of top jobs. Data scientists are in the top 20. So tons and tons of excitement, tons and tons of investment. But when you start talking to the experts and when they're looking across the industry around what's working and what's not, you see folks like Gartner saying that 60% of big data projects fail to get beyond those piloting and experimentation stages. Basically, they fail. And then you see McKinsey, who's refreshed their analysis as of last year, and when they survey hundreds and hundreds of executives, what they're finding is something similar. That over 5 out of 6 executives will basically say that their programs were somewhat effective at best, and a quarter will say they were completely ineffective. So it raises this question, why is there so much money going into this, and why is there so little impact really being captured? And so today I'll be talking about what I found. So a couple of top reasons. Some of these may be familiar to you, and you may have heard them in your own teams. The lack of data science talent. We know that there's a shortage. It's tough to get talent. It's tough to retain talent. Lack of big data storage tools. Data lakes to store all of your data so your team can access it. Big data processing hardware. We know that a lot of corporations have actually been slow to adopt cloud infrastructure, and that's really important for us to be able to leverage analytics. improper data preparation. We've got some very skilled folks. We also have folks who sometimes make some errors. And so we still have some errors in our analytics. And then, as you know, in the last basically 18 months, the growth of neural networks and deep learning. Still, a fraction of companies are really using this. Many of you may have heard of these, and many of you may be thinking, in meetings saying, hey, we just don't have the investments to do this stuff. We can't hire the right people. These are the common challenges. Well, just kidding. These are really not the top reasons why analytics projects are failing. I think you may be hearing this often, and in fact, there are some challenges here, but these aren't the top reasons. There's actually two reasons. The first, I'll go through some primary reasons from a number of executives in the insurance space. Basically, they found three major reasons why analytics projects failed. There's limited adoption or integration of the analytics into the business, or lack of strategic alignment and direction. And then finally, lack of sort of available data. And then you had other reasons too, poor analytics, actually doing the analytics improperly, et cetera. But if you take a look at this and you take a step back, what you find is change management actually accounts for 60% of the failures. It's all about change. The other reason why analytics projects are having difficulty in getting traction and being successful is sponsorship. If you look at this chart here, we have two columns, one that designates high-performing organizations and one that designates low-performing organizations. Again, this was also a study done by McKinsey. High-performing organizations are organizations where the analytics organization has self-reported that they have seen a meaningful impact from their data efforts, and they have some organization around analytics. Low-performing organizations are ones that have been ineffective or haven't seen any results and don't really have much capabilities built today. What you'll see is 44% of those high-performing organizations, they have direct sponsorship by the CEO. The CEO has this as one of the top 5 agenda items. When you look at low-performing organizations, you see a much smaller number. And then if the CEO is not sponsoring it, then it's someone in the C-suite, the COO, the CMO, whoever it may be. And so that executive level sponsorship is really important. Some of us may be struggling with getting that sort of senior level engagement. The good news is many are getting interested in this, but how do we get them really, really excited about that? So today, what I would like to focus on is about change management. I believe analytics is all about change management. We have access to a tremendous amount of data, and you think about the data we have, ultimately it's to change behaviors, it's to change decisions. And so to reframe analytics from doing the math, but in fact to change behaviors. So there's 3 parts that I'll focus on today. The first one is building senior leadership support for analytics. So if you don't have it today, what are some tactics to go about doing it? The second one is how do you cultivate talent to drive the change? And the third aspect is the human element of change. What are some of the tips and tricks to overcome some of the common challenges in adoption of analytics tools and technology? And then I'll pause at the end. I think about 5 minutes we'll have for questions. So I'll start first with the senior leadership support for change. So I'll remember my first couple of weeks at Ameriprise. I had a chance to meet with the executive team, and I was sharing with them all these advancements in analytics. All the deep learning capabilities, the data lake, some use cases where you can apply it. And I still remember that the CFO looked at me and he said, "Okay, so how is this going to impact my P&L?" And so for any of you who are not familiar with P&L, it's basically the profit and loss statement. It's the income statement. He was interested in knowing, when I go and chat with when I do my earnings calls every quarter, how are your efforts going to impact the bottom line of the company? And so, that changed the way I thought about analytics. It actually kind of underscored one of the big parts of why analytics projects succeed. In fact, the ones that succeed and get the senior leadership support start with first estimating and sizing out the opportunity. And so now what we do in our analytics group, we have hundreds of opportunities. We size them out. We estimate out the potential bottom line impact, either on cost or profits. And then we also prioritize on the ones where we have availability of data and where we think we can drive change. This basically allows us to do 2 things. The first is it allows us to identify quick wins. And quick wins are things that you can do very rapidly to build momentum, to prove results, and to generate bottom line impact. What it also does is sometimes it moves some of the more exciting, sexy type of projects to the back. And something that's not, if we like to do analytics work, sometimes that's not enjoyable to see, but sometimes to get an analytics organization to start growing and developing, it's what's necessary. One of the organizations that I've been inspired by since I've been since a young boy is the SEAL team. If you guys are familiar with the Navy SEAL team, they are brought in to focus on the most challenging situations for our nation's security. They're a small team, an elite squadron that goes in, focuses on a mission, and delivers against that mission. I've always thought about our analytics team as being something like that. And the organizations that are successful think about their organizations operating in that type of capacity. They focus primarily on the most important topics on the C-suite agenda, and they limit it to a set of projects that they want to focus on, and they make sure they drive that mission from the start to finish. What this also implies, and I think the big lesson learned here, is that often analytics organizations, especially if they're very talented, get a lot of requests for data and insights, and often find themselves handling a lot of sort of business intelligence, BI type of requests. There's a cost to that, and it's hard to, in fact, be able to demonstrate the bottom line impact of your team's performance if you're doing a lot of BI. So I always caution that as you're thinking about your analytics, BI is important, but think about those sort of top strategic issues that the CXOs, the CEO is going to be able to speak about at their earnings meetings. One thing I found that was really striking was that, especially when we talked with a bunch of these chief analytics officers and these executives at organizations, especially those that invest tremendous amounts of dollars into analytics, it wasn't that the organizations that were investing a lot of money were being successful. In fact, some organizations that weren't investing a lot were being successful. And I think the reason why were a fewfold. The first is that they were able to build momentum with small investments. They did pilot cases and they drove them all the way from initiation to production. And that built a lot of credibility for those organizations. In addition to that, it forced them to be a little scrappy, to run around, capture the data, not to necessarily invest in a big data lake, but to build a sandbox environment, to work with the data, and then be able to see the insights, and then gather, again, momentum and excitement around them. So one of the things that we've seen typically is that organizations who've been able to pull this off a few times, do this for a couple of projects and see success, typically the executives in the organization will start saying, hey, you know what? I actually do want to invest millions of dollars in this. I see the need for it. I've seen it work. I want to industrialize it. And that is typically the path that, leads to success. So that's a little bit on the senior leadership side. The other piece now is on cultivating talent that can drive change. So I want to get a show of hands here. How many of the folks in the audience like building PowerPoint decks? I think 5 hands raised. Okay, how many of you folks like creating budget requests for approval? Okay, had a half. Okay, 2 hands. Okay, how many of you like spending time in meetings with business partners, or spending more than 50% of your time in meetings with business partners? Okay, we got like 5, 6 hands. And how many of you folks like doing project management? Okay, so you can see very, very few people like doing that type of work, but the reality is, it's that type of work that actually drives a lot of change management. And in fact, as we think about the capabilities that are necessary to drive change within an organization, it's sort of threefold. The first one is the business knowledge, right? It's having the business expertise to know that, hey, if we did these analyses and we did these insights, what would be the impact on the bottom line? And how can we actually galvanize the organization to do it? The second is the actual analytics capability. Do we have the tools, technology, techniques, people to do the math? And then finally, the technology side. Do we have the data, prepared? Do we have it stored? Do we have it accessible? All that type of stuff. In reality, you have people in different buckets today, but there's rarely anybody at the center of this. And in my prior life, we call this role the translator. The translator was so important at McKinsey that they spent millions of dollars training up thousands of their consultants to become this role, because they realized that the future of change in organizations is marrying analytics with business impact and change. So let me tell you a little bit more about this profile. So typically, translators are folks who are well-versed in the priorities of the business units. They have a strong track record. They're high performers in their organization. They have a reputation for challenging the status quo, for being problem solvers, and they've led some sort of change effort in the past. Now, that said, even just those three first bullets are really hard to find in organizations, right? Even outside of data science, these are really, they're diamonds in an organization because they can make so much happen. But in addition to that, they have a moderate understanding of analytics, techniques, and capabilities, and they have a moderate understanding of technology. These are not folks who are experts. They're sort of a jack of all trades, but master of none. And the expectation shouldn't be that they're going to be able to write R or Python code. It's going to be that they can actually interpret business problems and drive results. So what do they do? Oh, by the way, those folks who have this sort of strong business track record, a lot of these analytics capabilities are actually trainable, especially if they don't need to be experts at it. One of the things that I think is, we could go out and do tomorrow is to say, hey, if we have any strong business partners that we like to work with, that really like analytics, that see the potential in analytics, to start hosting boot camps for some of those high performers and to say, hey, you know what? Let me teach you actually the ins and outs of some of the different models we use, how do you interpret the results, how that works, just so they have sort of that understanding so that they know where they can apply analytics to separate use cases. So what do these translators do? And I'm going to touch on a couple aspects. There's the whole list here, but I'll just touch on 2 or 3 here. The first is they lead cross-functional hypothesis generation. So many of you are in large organizations that have many different divisions. The output of your analytics and your models are only as good as the hypotheses and the data you put in. So this role is actually charged with having to work with business partners from across the organization, hold meetings with them, and come up with a whole set of questions around why is XYZ happening. And while they're doing so, they're also, and I'll just give a case example, we worked on client attrition at Ameriprise, and we sat down with the service team, we sat down with the digital team, we sat down with the product team, we sat down with all these teams, and we started asking them, why do you think we have, why do you think retention is like this, or why do you think attrition is like this? And they gave us a whole host of ideas. And interestingly enough, after those conversations, they handed over to us the most sensitive data they have. And because they felt they were bought in on the project and they had a say in it. And we kept keeping them engaged. When it came to implementation, they were fully versed in what we were doing and they were excited about the results. So this leading the cross-functional hypothesis generation can also accelerate your data gathering as well. The other piece about the translators is that they should be able to gut check and pressure test analysis before it goes out to the business. Often if something doesn't make sense, they'll ask those questions and they'll just make sure it's prepared appropriately. And then finally, the last couple of bullets focus mainly on the project management and the financial type of requirements, right? You need to ensure that someone's requesting budget, is sharing this with senior leaders, is doing all the communication, is working with the training teams, et cetera. So it's a role that many organizations are starting to develop, but is one that is absolutely crucial for success. And one thing I just want to highlight on this role is that translators don't do modeling, they don't do data engineering, they don't build data environments, they're not working in AWS, they just can't do that. Some of them may dabble in it, but that's not the capabilities that they were hired for. That brings me to the third aspect, and it's mastering the human elements in change. So I'm going to share some tips and tricks of things that I've just seen across a number of clients I've worked with, as well as my time at Ameriprise. As we start thinking about analytics problems, I always like to think about it in 3 ways. One is what happened in the past, what happened in the present, what's going on today, and what do we need to do in the future. These are questions I think at the outset of any analytics project we should ask to understand what change is actually required. So when we think about the past, has this effort been done before? You will often find that there were dead bodies that tried the project before you did a few years ago, and it was not successful. To really understand why wasn't it successful, in our experience, for example, at Ameriprise and Attrition, we looked at this, and we did have models, and we had limited success with those models. What we found out was we didn't have sort of the cross-functional data that we needed from our digital team and from some of our other teams to build a robust model. We also realized that some of the machine learning capabilities had advanced. And the third part was that the human element was actually, unfortunately, challenging. Advisors who use our analytics didn't necessarily trust the results. And so we had to understand that as we got started. The second is the present. If you know something, what are you actually going to go do that's different from what you're doing today? An example I like to think about is one of my friends. He was doing analytics for a big mining company. And what you'll realize from mines is that if a mining truck or a shovel, what they're called hydraulic excavators or electric rope shovels, if one of them goes down, number one, they're hugely expensive pieces of capital equipment, but when they go down, the mine productivity goes down dramatically. They lose hundreds of thousands of dollars, in a matter of hours, depending on the commodity. So they say, hey, let's predict when these machines are going to break. So they spent all this time building these predictive algorithms. They go to the maintenance team and they say, hey, you know what? Here is the predictive, here's our insights on which machines are going to break. What they find out, in fact, is that a lot of the maintenance folks weren't even doing regularly scheduled maintenance on the machines. And so the question is, can you get people to use a predictive algorithm if they're not already just doing the standard maintenance? So knowing and having a pulse on what behavior change is required is really important. In that situation, it's probably better to just build simple dashboards and tools to help them just manage normal maintenance schedules first and then get to the predictive side once they're ready. The third is thinking about the future. How far in advance do you need to know the answer to a problem to be able to act on it? An example, we tried to predict employee type of attrition, and we were able to build a model that had decent results for predicting attrition 1 month out. When we talked to our senior executives, what we learned was for them to do anything with it, they needed to know 6 months ahead of time. So we had spent all this time building this model, and then we realized that, in fact, we were sort of building it for the wrong outcome. So the more and more we can ask these questions at the outset of our projects, the more and more we can be more targeted and ensure that the people who are going to use them are able to use them. Another piece about humanizing the analytics is communicating the results. Many of you are probably familiar with these charts, right? Your confusion matrix, your ROC curves, distributions of your predicted versus actual, et cetera. The reality is that nobody understands this outside of your analytics organization. And so using very simple language to communicate your results is truly important. So as a team, we talk about these charts and these metrics all the time. But when we go to business leaders, we use very simple language. We can predict 60% of equipment failure with 1 in 3 odds, right? And this is better than what we can do today by X amount. And it will save us $10 million, making it really simple for people to understand the outcome of your models. This is probably the most important part, and this is building trust with your end users. So many analytics projects fail because the people who need to use them don't trust the results and don't trust the analysis that was actually done, even though we as an analytics group have been able to test them and validate them. So for example, for our client attrition work, we needed to convince advisors that a client was likely to leave. And in order to do that, we had to actually provide reasons why they were going to leave. We couldn't just give them a probability score. Often we'll give them a probability score and they'll have no idea. What does a probability score mean and how did you come up with it? Instead, we simplified it dramatically. We chose a threshold. We said if it is above this threshold, it's automatically high, and we gave human understandable reason codes. And we went a step further. We started to prove it to them. We started to prove that, in fact, these results were happening by showing them historical data. We always use cross-validation. We use holdout samples. We do that in the data science community. But often when we're working with our end users, we have to do the same thing, but in a different way. We actually have to show them, here are the clients that left you in the last couple of months or whatever it was, and here's why they left, and here's our model would have predicted that. They instantly start saying, wow, that's pretty amazing. Tell me more. I want to use your tool. The other piece is piloting it and building sort of the social credibility. And that means establishing user groups within your organization where you have folks who are testing the results and they're providing feedback on a real-time basis. So you can continue to improve, and they can also share with their peers the success they've had. Finally, it's empowering your end users. The final thing is setting expectations. Models aren't perfect. They're going to be wrong. And so setting from the outset kind of what the limits of your model are, doing some training, web access sessions with your users. It doesn't have to be very in-depth, but for them to just understand kind of the limits. It's not voodoo science. There are specific reasons why someone's showing up, and here's what you can go do about it. And the other is capturing feedback. I mean, Pandora does this really well. They play songs you love, and they play songs you don't like, but you put the thumbs down. Give the ability for users to give the thumbs down. They get their voice to be heard, and it also allows you to improve your models. So just reflecting on this, there are a couple of things I'd like for everyone to take away, right? To be successful in kickstarting change within your organization, ensure that you've got senior leadership support to drive the change. Ensure that you've developed the talent to drive the change, especially through that translator capability. And the third is think about the human elements of change and spend a lot of time getting that right. Now, I just want to, share a couple final things. It's a little bit separate from, this whole conversation, but it's, there's no shortage of problems in the world today. We have problems with healthcare, we have problems with education, we have problems with economy, we have problems everywhere. And the reality is I've historically seen my job as a role in analytics, to work with numbers, to share insights. And I've started to shift my thinking. In fact, at Ameriprise, we have over 2 million families that invest with us. That's, if you think about 2 million families times X number of people per family, we're talking about millions of people we impact. And I started thinking about the fact that my job actually is not about the analytics. It's actually about improving the outcomes for our clients. If they can save better for their children's education, then they have a better opportunity in life. If they can save for a healthcare crisis or for their healthcare costs, that's great. If they can have insurance prepared, so if something happens that they're not prepared for, they'll be okay. And I think every one of us in the room have things that we're passionate about, things that we care about. If there's one message that I'd like to leave behind is that we all here are actually the change makers in this country and in the world. It's the data, it's the insights and the facts that make the change. We have to think ourselves not only as data and analytics folks or technology folks, but as the next change makers in the world. So thank you for spending some time. I only have like a minute left, I guess. I don't know if there's enough time for questions. We are hiring, so shoot me a note if you're interested. And then the second is, if you have any problems at your organization that you're facing, I'd love to chat.